In the year 1800, Paris was officially at peace, yet the average citizen faced a greater risk walking its streets than many soldiers did on distant battlefields. What makes this unsettling is that danger did not come from invading armies or open warfare, but from the everyday life of the city itself, where crime, disease, hunger, and chaos waited at every corner. After sunset, entire neighborhoods transformed into places even the authorities avoided, and daylight offered little safety for the poor and working class. People vanished without records, bodies were found without names, and violence often passed unnoticed in the noise of a city struggling to control itself. Paris presented the image of progress and power, but beneath that surface was a reality where survival depended less on bravery and more on constant vigilance, because the streets themselves had become the most unpredictable enemy. Daily life in Paris was shaped by overcrowding and inequality, creating conditions where desperation thrived. Narrow streets trapped filth and darkness, while unregulated taverns, gambling houses, and black markets fueled crime that rarely faced punishment. The police force was stretched thin and unevenly applied, offering protection mainly to wealthier districts while poorer areas were left to manage themselves. Theft, assault, and extortion became ordinary risks, especially for workers returning home after dark. Disease spread easily through stagnant water and waste-filled alleys, turning minor injuries into death sentences. For many Parisians, danger was not a sudden event but a constant presence, forcing people to develop instincts for survival rather than trust in law or order. The city functioned not because it was safe, but because its people learned how to move through danger without drawing attention. What history often overlooks is that these streets shaped behavior more deeply than any battlefield ever could. Children learned early how to avoid trouble. Workers formed informal networks for protection, and entire communities developed silent rules for survival. Violence became normalized not because people accepted it, but because resisting it openly carried its own risks. Paris in 1800 was a city rebuilding its identity, yet its foundations were unstable, resting on lives constantly exposed to danger from within rather than threats from outside. The true struggle of the era was not fought with weapons or uniforms, but in the daily effort to survive streets that offered no mercy. This hidden war defined the lives of ordinary people, proving that in Paris at the turn of the century, peace did not mean safety, and survival was the greatest victory of all. As the city pushed forward into the new century, the dangers of Parisian streets continued to evolve, becoming more complex rather than less severe. Political instability lingered beneath the surface, and sudden changes in power often left neighborhoods in confusion, where laws shifted faster than people could adapt. Crowds could turn hostile without warning, driven by rumor, hunger, or fear, and once unrest began, it spread through the streets with frightening speed. Ordinary people learned to sense these changes instinctively, reading tension in voices, movement, and silence, knowing when to disappear or seek shelter. Even honest work offered no guarantee of safety, as wages were uncertain and theft common, pushing many toward desperation. The streets did not simply reflect danger, they produced it, shaping lives around avoidance rather than ambition. Despite these conditions, Paris did not collapse because its people developed ways to endure constant risk without surrendering to chaos. Informal communities formed within districts, offering protection and warning where official authority failed. Shopkeepers watched streets collectively, workers traveled in groups, and neighbors relied on shared knowledge to survive unpredictable nights. Yet this resilience came at a cost, as trust remained limited and fear quietly shaped daily decisions. Paris in 1800 was a city not at war with an external enemy, but one struggling against itself, where survival required caution more than courage. The true conflict was invisible, fought every day in alleyways and crowded streets, reminding its people that danger was not something to escape briefly, but something to live alongside in order to endure. As time passed, the danger of Parisian streets began to leave lasting marks on how people understood justice, authority, and survival itself. Many no longer believed protection would come from institutions because law often arrived too late or not at all, especially in the poorest districts. This absence of reliable order forced individuals to become cautious observers, constantly assessing who could be trusted and which streets should be avoided entirely. Nightfall carried a particular weight, not because violence only happened then, but because darkness removed witnesses and certainty. The city's layout, with its tight passages and hidden corners, offered an opportunity to those willing to exploit fear, while leaving the vulnerable with few options for escape. Paris taught its residents that safety was temporary and situational, something earned moment by moment rather than guaranteed by peace. Yet within this constant threat, the city continued to grow, driven by ambition, labor, and the promise of opportunity that refused to disappear. People accepted danger as part of urban life, not because it was tolerable, but because leaving meant surrendering any chance of advancement. The streets that threatened them also provided work, connection, and possibility, creating a relationship built on necessity rather than trust. Paris in 1800 existed in this contradiction, a city alive with potential yet shadowed by risk at every step. What history often records as progress was for ordinary people a daily negotiation with danger, proving that the most enduring battles of the era were not fought with armies, but in the streets that shaped every decision and every life. As the years unfolded, the constant danger of Parisian streets began to shape not only individual behavior, but the collective character of the city itself. People learned to move with purpose, avoiding hesitation, because uncertainty made one visible and vulnerability invited trouble. Silence became a form of protection, as questions and complaints were often safer kept unspoken. Parents taught children how to blend into crowds, how to recognize threats without staring, and how to disappear when tension rose. These lessons were passed down quietly, forming an unwritten education that mattered more than formal schooling. The city's rhythm was built around caution, with routines designed to minimize exposure to risk rather than maximize comfort. Paris did not soften its people, it sharpened them, forcing awareness and restraint into everyday life. Despite this, hope persisted, not as optimism, but as determination to endure. People continued to build families, pursue trades, and imagine futures even while navigating streets that offered little mercy. The danger did not break Paris, but it left deep impressions on how progress was understood, revealing that growth often demanded sacrifice from those least protected. Paris in 1800 stood as a city where peace existed in name, but conflict lived in daily experience, proving that the most dangerous battles are sometimes fought far from any battlefield, in places where danger becomes routine and endurance becomes the only path forward. As the city continued to expand, the dangers embedded in Parisian streets became a defining force in how people related to one another, shaping interactions through caution rather than openness. Trust was fragile, built slowly and broken easily, because experience had taught residents that desperation could turn anyone into a threat. Informal systems of warning developed, gestures, looks, and subtle changes in behavior that signaled when to avoid an area or retreat indoors. These signals mattered more than official notices because they traveled faster and reflected lived reality. The streets themselves became teachers, offering constant reminders that survival depended on awareness and restraint. Paris demanded attention at all times, punishing those who moved carelessly or assumed safety without proof. Yet within this environment, the city's culture and identity continued to evolve, drawing strength from endurance rather than security. Music, conversation, and shared rituals provided moments of relief, allowing people to reclaim humanity within harsh conditions. These moments did not erase danger, but they offered balance, reminding residents that life could continue even under constant threat. Paris in 1800 survived not because it eliminated risk, but because its people learned how to live alongside it without surrendering completely to fear. The streets remained more dangerous than wars, not due to constant violence, but because danger was unpredictable and unavoidable. In enduring this reality, ordinary Parisians shaped a city defined as much by resilience as by risk, carrying forward lessons forged not in battlefields, but in the everyday struggle to stay alive. As the years moved on, the memory of danger remained embedded in Parisian life, influencing how people imagined the city long after conditions slowly began to change. Those who survived the worst years
carried habits shaped by fear, choosing familiar routes, avoiding unnecessary attention, and relying on community knowledge rather than written rules. The streets, they taught them lessons that could not be unlearned, that peace did not guarantee safety, and progress often arrived unevenly, protecting some while leaving others exposed. Even when reforms appeared and order increased, the awareness of vulnerability lingered, shaping behavior across generations. Paris taught its people to expect uncertainty, and that expectation became part of the city's identity. Looking back at Paris in 1800 reveals a truth rarely emphasized in history, that the greatest danger of the era was not found on battlefields, but woven into daily life itself. The streets shaped character more deeply than any war ever could, demanding endurance, awareness, and restraint from those who walked them each day. Ordinary people survived because they were not fearless, but because they learned how to live with constant